Frank, could you please sum up the debate?
Thank you, Mr President. I really want to thank all of the speakers who have made a contribution, both today in the debate and yesterday. I, from the outset, say that this is actually still a simple bill. In December last year, when I introduced this as part of an abortion law reform package, the safe access zones were contained within that particular bill that also seeks to decriminalise abortion. That, of course, decriminalisation of abortion, was sent off to salary as a terms of reference. At the time, back in December 2018, I did not seek to progress on safe access zones because the High Court challenge was underway and that ruling had not been made. I note that some attempts have been made to say that it's too soon and that we need to wait for the salary report. Well, actually, the fact that we are about to debate abortion in this state is the very reason that now we should debate safe access zones, to protect patients and workers alike before we as a parliament undertake that debate. It is precisely the same track that was used in New South Wales. In New South Wales, they prioritised a debate on safe access zones and ensured the safety of those patients and of those health practitioners before they commenced their most recent parliamentary debate on the decriminalisation of abortion. It's been said that this bill is a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. I find that claim extraordinary. It's been said by some of the speakers that we are seeking to solve a problem that does not apply to us here in Adelaide or us here in Australia, that these are somehow violations of a patient's privacy, of their safety, of their right to health care that only apparently occur across the border or across the sea. Well, I certainly don't want to see those things that do happen across the border and across the sea happen here. I'll share with you one thing that did happen in Victoria, certainly in Australia. On the 16th of July 2004, one medical facility, the East Melbourne Fertility Clinic, placed a note on their door. That note said, "We regret to advise that as a result of a fatal accident involving some members of staff, we have been forced to cancel all appointments today." Australia, Melbourne, this century. What happened, of course, was that a man, Peter James Knight, walked into that clinic carrying a rifle, other weapons, including 16 litres of kerosene, 3 lighters, torches, 30 gags, with the intent to kill everyone inside that clinic. He succeeded in killing Stephen Rogers, the security guard. He shot that man in the chest, killing him. The staff and the clients then overpowered that murderer. He had intended to massacre the 15 staff and the 26 patients at the clinic that day. That struck fear into the heart of workers in reproductive health centres right across our country. And when, in the briefing to this bill, Bridget Coombe, who used to be the director of the centre at Woodville, spoke about how that really changed the lives of workers in Australia, increased their mental health stressors, put incredible pressures on those workplaces, that was dismissed by one of the members of this chamber as somehow a figment of Ms Coombe's imagination. The fact that somebody is killed at work because they are doing a particular job strikes the fear into the very hearts of every worker who does that job. This bill here is not a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. This bill here is actually proportionate and far delayed. We are now one of only 2 jurisdictions in this country that does not have a safe access zone. There is no slippery slope here. We are in fact far behind the 8 ball. We have put our patients and our health workforce under undue stress and in an unprotected state. This is a proportionate measure that has the experiences that have gone before us, where in New South Wales, women now no longer, when they seek an abortion, are handed plastic fetuses. In New South Wales, no longer do sidewalk counsellors follow them to the door. In New South Wales, they have these safe access zones. In every other state, except for South Australia and WA, they have these safe access zones for very good reason. WA is about to implement this legislation as well. They have a discussion paper, which is most informative and certainly was used to help support this bill. But when I hear members say, oh, we don't have to worry here in South Australia because there haven't been many complaints, and 40 Days for Life do the right thing and they all sign a contract. That man who killed that security guard was not a member of any of the regular protesters, but he was given courage to walk into that place, given comfort that somehow he was acting righteously to walk into that place, to seek to kill those staff and those patients because of the ongoing protests that we have seen in this country. We never used to see them 30 years ago. We have seen increasingly the tactics of the United States employed here in Australia and in the UK and in other jurisdictions, and the best way to ameliorate those tactics has been safe access zones. I point to the UK, who've only just introduced their very first access zone. In the UK, the way that they've tackled this problem, the way that they've avoided using the so-called sledgehammer to crack a walnut, I think has made things worse. They have counter-protests, as they do in the US. They have escorts, and many of us would have seen the escorts in the US, where they put fabric over the top of a patient's head. They wear high-vis, colourful outfits to escort patients to seek health care. Do we really want that to be what the situation is in South Australia? Do we really want South Australia to be the sole state where we do not have safe access zones? Because I tell you, when you look on the 40 Days for Life website and you look at their activities right across the world, you note that their absolute sole stated intention, their boast of their achievement, is that they have closed 104 abortion centres. Is that they have forced 191 workers to quit. Is that really what we want to see here in South Australia, where we know, in fact, we do have barriers to access to abortion health care already, and we do already see staff put under undue stress? By not giving them the protection of the safe access zones, we are actually creating far more harm than these very small 150-metre safe access zones seek to provide a space free of harassment, intimidation and haranguing. A space where anyone is welcome to pray, because I'm sure some of the patients probably pray. I'm sure their family members, I'm sure staff feel quite free to pray. But if you do so in a way that is stopping somebody accessing healthcare, that is harassing, intimidating, that is violating their rights, then surely it is the least we can do to afford them some small respite so that they can seek healthcare in peace and free of that harassment. There is no slippery slope here. It is a very small piece of comfort to give patients at a very difficult time in their lives. But other tactics we could see develop here in South Australia, because I've got to say that 40 Days for Life website has little markers all over the world, and the only marker that they have, the only target that they have currently is in South Australia and Adelaide at Woodville on that website. But they are, of course, not the only group that exists. And they are also not a group that has always been quite as squeaky clean as been presented today. And I refer members of the council to the Record. The Record, whose byline is the parish, the nation, the world, published out of WA, but proudly the weekly newspaper of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Perth, published every Wednesday, and indeed boasting having been established in 1874, the oldest weekly newspaper in Australia, some 4 years ago, reflected the concerns that were raised here by the Archdiocese of Adelaide and Port Pirie. In fact, 40 Days for Life were subject to what was perceived to be a ban. And I note that that article, Adelaide, but not Tasmania, to host 40 Days for Life, that was published on the 26th of February 2014, bemoaning the fact that Tasmania now had safe access zones, but heralding the fact that Adelaide was still fair game to target patients and staff alike, noted that the Archdiocese had sent out a letter stating, Archdiocese speaks with a united voice under leadership of Archbishop Wilson, and our message and structures of accountability are clear. This is not always so among other organisations that nevertheless share our deep concerns for the protection of life and the unborn. For this reason, Archbishop Wilson asks that you do not publicise in our church bulletins the material you may receive from time to time from 40 Days for Life or other similar organisations, but that you continue to make our commitment to life very clear through prayer and action in your parishes and communities. When even the Archdiocese of Adelaide and Port Pirie has concerns about the practices of 40 Days for Life, and according to this article, had to haul them in for a meeting to give them a strict talking to and obviously get them to sign some good behaviour pieces of paperwork, then how can we trust other rogue groups or this group to do the right thing? There's also been a lot of mention made that permits are issued. Well, permits are actually only issued to 40 Days for Life. There are the rogue protesters, individual protesters, and there is nothing to stop their ongoing activity. That permit system that's been developed has actually been done specifically to try and counter some of the issues that arose with 40 Days for Life. There is also a car parking system that is used to push them to the edge of the car park, which is why you don't see them right on the door, because the staff have had to collude to protect themselves in their workplace by parking cars in ways that the protesters can't come right to the door. That is how they have dealt with this. And time again, if you read all of the FOIs, you will see that the council, the clinic and the police have all been hopeful that we will see law reform. I will go on to just address these suggestions that our current Summary Offences Act might be able to be adapted to reflect and respond to this situation. Do we really want to get to the point where, as in the UK, restraining orders need to be taken out by healthcare workers to stop these protesters? Certainly there was one protester in the UK who was sentenced to 100 hours of community service and subject to a 5-year restraining order for her behaviours. Do we want to reward that type of behaviour with lax laws that aren't specific and fit for purpose? And do we want to put our police in the invidious situation where they haven't been given the appropriate tools to do the job of keeping patients and healthcare workers safe? I'll reflect just on a few of the things that were claimed in the debate, and right from the outset, I will note that this bill does not ban anyone from praying. In fact, as I said in the briefing, my aunt is praying for me to get legislation through this place around the areas of protection. My aunt, being a nurse actually, has a particular vested interest in seeing this sort of law reform. People pray for many and varied reasons. Nothing in this bill will stop them from doing so anywhere, anyhow, anytime. But if they are undertaking prohibited practices and harassing and haranguing and restricting the rights of others, then the police will have the appropriate tools to take action. But of course the police will need to be called before they take that action, and the courts, as the final arbiter, will be able to decide whether or not that is a proportional response. The Honourable Claire Scriven stated that we've been told that this is a simple bill. We've been told that there must be exclusion zones around abortion facilities because women are being harassed, intimidated and obstructed from accessing appointments they have freely chosen to access. We are told staff are being filmed and that footage is being put on social media. Well, yes, they are, and there is ample evidence of that. Here in South Australia and, of course, in other jurisdictions, one new technique that the UK group, I think they're called Abort 69, but there's so many names and they're so varied and vivid, I'm not totally sure if that's the exact group, has actually started to Facebook live stream people going in and out of abortion clinics. They also take up other things where they'll strike a conversation up with patients, find out where they work and call their employer and tell them where they are. This is the sort of behaviour that we seek to stop. The Honourable Ms Scriven said it is our role to go more deeply than that and actually look at what this does, what is currently the situation and whether this bill will assist or not. We need to listen to the stories of people who have been impacted by the current situation. First, where is the evidence base for this bill? Where is the evidence that women are being targeted and harassed? I refer, of course, to my second reading speech, the extensive FOI, the SAPOL FOI, which shows the police call-outs, and the countless case studies from both interstate and overseas. And let's remember, we will be the sole jurisdiction left. The target will be on our state's back if we do not create these safe access zones. But if that's not enough, how about the evidence that was submitted before the High Court when similar safe zones in Victoria and Tasmania were challenged? I point all honourable members to Madsen v Women's Health Centre Incorporated in accepting medical privacy as a significant privacy interest supporting the restriction of the right to free speech. The Supreme Court stated that the, quote, targeted picketing of a hospital or clinic threatens not only the psychological but also the physical well-being of the patient held captive by medical circumstances, end quote. I refer members also to the Human Rights Law Centre in their written submission. It is an example from Victoria, but is a similar situation, as presented to the High Court by the Human Rights Law Centre. Quote, one clear illustration of the findings of the Supreme Court in Fertility Control Clinic versus Melbourne City Council, McDonald J cited the unchallenged evidence that activities of the anti-abortion protesters included the following: standing outside the clinic every day for more than 20 years from Monday to Saturday inclusive in numbers from 3 to 12 persons, with 50 to 100 persons once a month. Approaching women apparently coming to the clinic, imposing their presence even when clearly unwelcome. Harassing women entering or leaving the clinic, engaging in arguments with the women and passers-by. Attempting to block women's entry to the clinic. Blocking the footpath outside the clinic. Entering the laneway that runs alongside the side of the clinic to follow patients or to stand and pray, sing and shout outside the clinic's consulting rooms, jostling and striking people passing the area entering the clinic, making offensive, frightening and misleading statements to patients and staff, engaging in loud singing, praying and shouting, clearly audible inside the clinic, intimidating and harassing patients of the clinic with the effect of deterring patients from attending the clinic and causing significant injury to the personal comfort of staff members, patients and others. I note that particularly when it comes to the PAC in Woodville, a number of complaints have been recorded by the Council from community members and those seeking the services of the PAC that protesters have been blocking and or obstructing footpaths leading to the PAC, to the extent that one particular local resident, a mother who had to push her pram down the street, was often unable to use her local footpath. Another example of the behaviour that will be prevented by safe access zones, as submitted to the High Court by the Caston Centre for Human Rights Law, includes the research of Dr Sifris and Dr Panovic identified adverse impact of protester behaviour that is constrained by the operation of safe access zones pursuant to Part 9A of the Public Health Act on patients seeking to access the premises. This included, but was not limited to, protesters approaching, following or walking alongside people approaching clinic premises, distributing pamphlets and distributing plastic models of fetuses, Protesters equating fetuses with babies by imploring patients not to kill their baby, quote, and castigating patients as murderers. Protesters chasing, photographing, heckling, threatening and verbally abusing patients and staff. Protesters preventing patients from exiting cars, impeding entry to clinics or clinic car parks and access along footpaths along clinics. Protesters displaying large and graphic posters depicting what purported to be fetuses post-abortion, fetuses in buckets or skulls of fetuses. Protesters distributing visually graphic literature containing medically inaccurate and misleading information, warning that abortion results in infertility, failed relationships, mental illness and cancer. There has been some claims that, given the Pregnancy Advisory Centre at Woodville has been in operation for some almost 3 decades, that where are all these terribly intrusive protests in the media? Members who claim this also have said that protesters have permits and that these haven't been denied or rescinded by the council. So how can anything that they are doing be wrong? Well, this is quite misleading. The 40 Days for Life vigil does have a permit, yes. And if the members were to read the FOI documents properly and fully, they would see that there has been occasions where they have breached the conditions of their permit and licence. But that's another matter. The point is that outside the 40 Days for Life vigil, other protesters do not apply, nor are they granted permits, but they do protest. Furthermore, not every breach is reported, and indeed, as individual patients and their supporters come in, the last thing on their mind, the last thing they want to do with their day is call the police or call the council. It is an undue burden that you put on these people in a very, very difficult and vulnerable time. I note that under the FOI documents, that the letter that stated, I am mindful of the resources required by the South Australian Police and the City of Charles Sturt in the monitoring of compliance with permit conditions, and hence I do not report every breach, was left out of the representations of these FOI documents. Indeed, you don't need to make a media spectacle of something for it to be real or to be recognised as an issue. Indeed, if we look at the police call-outs to the centre, and we know that issues do occur, over the past 3 years there have been at least 20 police call-outs, the majority of which are coded as 101, disturbance, and the next most common being 404, suspect/vehicle loitering. 7 of these call-outs have actually happened since I introduced my previous bill for abortion law reform. That same letter, of course, goes on to demonstrate just some of the behaviours that people working at or visiting the PAC face, which makes this bill necessary. Quote, in the last 2 weeks, Pregnancy Advisory Centre has responded to a complaint to the Premier's Department about the protesters' presence, responded to the distress experienced by attending ambulance officers who were filmed on a mobile telephone while leaving the site, and staff has provided clients with support who have reported being verbally harassed and intimidated when entering the premises. The content of the verbal tirade is incorrect and seditious. Domiciliary Care, who own Pregnancy Advisory Centre building, have previously reported a male person blowing a trumpet, creating a noise hazard, and people have wandered to the rear of the complex to peer into the back doors of the Pregnancy Advisory Centre. There has, of course, been other complaints, such as the one where, quote, a male was under the tree on the opposite side of the road and approached a female in her car, used inappropriate language, accusations and spat at her car. Or another complaint about 2 protesters harassing 2 women who were entering the site. These complaints have been disparaged within this debate. And first, I would contend that the FOI is not the full and accurate reflection on the number of complaints, because so many would not be reflected in those FOI documents. On that note, it was put, that somehow the staff members involved in this provision of healthcare somehow were overreacting with regards to their safety. I reiterate, they have seen a person who was there to provide them security, killed. They have seen threats on their lives. They receive correspondence. I've spoken to a particular doctor who is quite expert in this field, nearing retirement, and he has that collection of hate mail, of death threats, of threats of violence. And those things, as many of us know in this place, add up over time. They create psychological harm and they serve to deter people from providing the health care that our patients in this state need. Another claim that the bill prohibits discussion of abortion within 150 metres of the abortion clinic or of other hospitals that perform abortions. Indeed, it currently says within 150 metres of any hospital in the state, so the question arises, stated the Honourable Claire Scriven, should discussion of abortion be prohibited at an abortion facility? Well, the answer is clearly no, and that was a very twisted comprehension of the bill. I note also that the Honourable Claire Scriven went on to say we need to remember that this is a pregnancy advisory centre, so one would expect that abortion is not the only reason that people go here. Actually, that's a really salient point, and I would agree with that. The same goes for hospitals that provide abortion services. The honourable member was completely right. People who are seeking other healthcare services are also affected by having to run this gauntlet, and they shouldn't have to. Similarly, staff providing a range of care shouldn't have to, and they shouldn't face this intimidation just for doing their jobs. I note that some claim was made as a member of the Labor Party. The Honourable Ms Scriven was supported and advocated for freedom of assembly and claimed that this bill stopped people from that freedom of assembly. The bill does not say that. The bill does not prohibit the freedom for people to assemble. It says that they cannot assemble in this particular very defined and very small place. The High Court has upheld such a provision and has found that it does not impinge unduly on freedom of speech and other human rights. Furthermore, people aren't being prevented from assembling. Indeed, if you look at Queensland, where they now have the safe access zones, they're having a rally in the next few weeks, and they are very welcome to. I note in this place that we are a temple of democracy, but we are afforded protections. People can't come in here and stop us from doing our jobs, stop us from going about our business. The public gallery is full today, and rightfully so. People may well be quietly praying for this bill to fail. People may be quietly praying for me to shut up. They can do so. They are free to do so. This bill not only does not stop the ability for people to pray, it will not shut me up in this place at this time. I note that in New South Wales, the Labor Party had a party vote, a party position on protecting patients and workers alike by supporting safe access zones, and that they saw the need to do so. I note that the WA government, a Labor government, is introducing safe access zones, and we have the benefits of their discussion paper and their extensive work to support our bill here today. And I note and concur with the Labor Health Minister, Roger Cook, in WA, that all patients in Western Australia have the right to safety, privacy and respect when accessing health care, and that he could only imagine the distress a patient will experience when they arrive at a clinic to undergo a legal medical procedure and are confronted with a group of protesters. That is a Labor Health Minister and a Labor government doing the right thing by workers and patients alike. It is sad that we do not have a party vote here from the Labor Party in South Australia, when in other states they have taken that position in recent times. However, the union has come out strongly today, and I draw members' attention to the email that received just this afternoon from the ANMF of South Australia, who are standing up for workers. That email states that the core business of the ANMF SA branch is the representation of our members in all professional, industrial and legal matters relating to nursing, midwifery, health and aged care. They go on to state that they write to express our strong support for the Health Access Zones Amendment Bill 2019, which is before the Legislative Council today. They state, "We urge you to vote in support of this bill to respect a woman's right to dignity and privacy when seeking access to abortion services in South Australia." At its heart, this bill recognises abortion care is health care and that those needing and providing abortion services require and deserve the same respectful and private environment as applies to all other healthcare services. Because of the invasive and at times hostile activities of the anti-abortion protests outside the Pregnancy Advisory Centre in Woodville, it is necessary to legislate to ensure women and staff can access this essential and sensitive healthcare service without fear, intimidation, harassment or obstruction. The bill, which supports safety for both patients and workers, will align South Australia with other Australian states who have legislated to protect their community. The introduction of safe access zones legislation in Victoria, Tasmania, the ACT, the Northern Territory, Queensland and New South Wales demonstrates government's commitments to ensuring the right to provide and access healthcare without hindrance. Western Australia and South Australia remain the only Australian jurisdictions that have not responded to the need for safe access zones around abortion services. Legislators are supported by Australian opinion polls which demonstrate overwhelming community support for this legislative protection of areas around abortion services. In April, the High Court of Australia found that safe access zone laws in Victoria and Tasmania were constitutional and that any burden to communication or protest prohibition is justified because of the laws. Quote, "Legitimate purposes, which include the protection of the safety, well-being, privacy and dignity of persons accessing premises at which abortions are provided and ensuring unimpeded access to lawful medical services," going on to urge the Council to support this bill. I note that many suggestions have been made that people simply go and pray outside of an abortion centre. And apparently this bill suggests that one should not be able to pray outside of a centre and that the restriction on the freedom to pray is apparently hindered by this bill. Well, to describe what some people do outside the Pregnancy Advisory Centre as, quote, "simply praying," is disingenuous and deceitful and demonstrably untrue. There is evidence, not just here in South Australia, but around the world. And as I say, if we are the last jurisdiction in this country, we have seen that people are prepared to travel, not just from interstate, but also from overseas, to protest around abortion health care. You just need to look at the High Court challenge and the people who took that up. They had crossed state borders to go on protests outside those centres. They were prepared to take their challenge to the High Court, and they will be prepared to come here to South Australia to continue to prosecute their beliefs and, obviously, to pray. The activities in the FOI documents that were not documented by the speakers against the bill, both yesterday and today, forgot to mention that there was defined and reported inappropriate name-calling. Quote, "child killer" was stated to one client, "going to the devil's advocate" to another. PAC staff frequently respond to the clients who do experience distress, and that distress takes the form of frustration, tearfulness and anger when they are approached by these members of these prayer groups. In fact, one support person was so distraught when approached by the prayer group, he stated, quote, "I don't know what I would have done if I had not spoken to you," being the PAC counsellor today, raising the PAC's concerns not just for the patients but also for others. The timing of this bill and waiting for salary has been raised as reasons not to progress. I think it was also an interesting interpretation of the Law Society's point 16, that there may be some benefit of waiting. Well, the Law Society did not urge this place to wait, and the Law Society is not necessarily in the position of ensuring the safety of the citizens of this state when they go to seek health care, but this council is. And we know that this council will soon, in coming months, receive the Sowry report and debate abortion law reform, and I hope and pray will remove abortion from the criminal code. But the protection of patients and workers alike in the meantime is our role and responsibility. We have benefited from the Sowry process, and I think the member for Hurdle Vale was a little verbal today, but I would say that where we did benefit from the process was that we had the submissions that were made to that inquiry, and we were able to write to the main proponents to seek their input. So we have benefited in that way from the Sowry process, and there is no need to wait to provide protection to patients and workers alike, because we have the High Court ruling now, which we were waiting on back in December. My final point is that there were some claims made that it was a little harsh of the member for Hurdle Vale to call into question the work and the particular cafe, sorry, not the particular cafe, is it the Reborn shop. Now, I understand that that shop, in some of the complaints that are registered in the FOI, you would have seen that they hand out anti-abortion pamphlets in that shop. But as the Honourable Member Claire Scriven pointed out, they have nothing to do with 40 Days for Life or the other groups, and in fact she's quite right. They're the Genesis Pregnancy Centre. Now, that rang a few bells with me, because I remember back in the late 90s and early 2000s that the Genesis Pregnancy Advisory Centre were the subject of deceptive advertising, particularly in the Yellow Pages, and were also the subject of a Community Affairs Legislation Committee of the Senate for these disreputable practices, because they pretended to offer all three options when a woman sought help and counselling for an unplanned and sometimes unwanted pregnancy, but they did not actually provide the option of abortion, but deceptively did not present this in the Yellow Pages or in their advertising. So I'm not sure that I disagree with the assessment of the member for Hurdle Vale about their practices. I will go on to address what I am sure will be a very long committee stage. In this place here today, we all have our voices, and we have a diversity of voices. This is not a pro-choice versus pro-life argument. This is also not a freedom of speech versus right to healthcare argument, because as the Universal Declaration on Human Rights quite appropriately and simply affirms, human rights are universal and indivisible. So you may have your freedom of speech, but it need not impinge on the right of patients to healthcare or of workers to go about their rightful employment. And in doing so, this bill provides an incredibly small, simple and proportionate response. I commend the bill to the Council.
I put the question that this bill now be read a second time. Those with the question say aye. Aye. Against, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells. Those for the question that the bill now, the question before the council was that the bill be read a second time. Those for the question will pass to my right. Those against the question will pass to my left. I appoint a teller for the ayes, the Honourable Ms Franks. I appoint a teller for the no, the Honourable Ms Scriven. Honourable Scriven? Yep. In 12 ayes and 5 noes, it's resolved in the affirmative.